Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Robin Craig, and this is Robin Craig Live, where I am broadcasting from Houston, Texas. And I'm happy to report it's a wonderful 50-something degree evening. It's a little bit chilly. I know if you're up there in Idaho or North Dakota or Indiana, you're going, Robin, hush, girl. We have snow. But when you live in Texas, you got thinner blood. So 58, as it was this morning, is really chilly for us. But I'm happy that we got some wonderful rain. We've needed it so desperately. But we went straight from drought to flooding. It was the weirdest thing to hear the word flooding when we have not been able to get rain all summer. But thankfully we did. I think God heard me saying, I need to water my plants. He was just helping me out a little bit. So I'm glad you could join me because tonight we are talking about a serious topic, understanding grief. And I had another topic in mind, but I had a number of people who contacted me this week and shared with me that they had lost a loved one. And it's just so tragic. One of my sweet friends lost a little baby. Another friend of mine lost his mom. And I just realized a lot of people are grieving. And in the end, who knows what grief is? We don't even know what it is. It's not something that we typically study about. It seems that something happens and we're thrown into it. So I'm honored tonight to have an opportunity to speak with Dr. Laurie Baldwin. She's a psychologist here in Houston with her PhD, and she's got a lot of wonderful insight. But before we talk to her, it's time for the Critter Update. Now, you guys heard me say I heard some activity recently. Oh my gosh, I just had something in my attic that was so big, it sounded like it was running laps. It was just literally going in a circle. I thought, have these guys not only made a nest, they've made a jogging track up there? Because I could just hear them going round and round and round. Well, they kept me up one night from 3 a.m. to 4:30 a.m. And that's not fun to just lie there looking at the ceiling thinking, when are they going to get tired and go to bed? Well, I thought, I'm going to catch this sucker. So I went out and I made my possum food. And when I looked in the kitchen, I thought, I haven't cooked lately. I'm not cooking much at all these days. And really, I haven't since I've been widowed. But I just started looking to see, I got to find something really tasty. Well, I had some ham, so I put the ham in there. And then I was looking in my pantry and I found a can of Spam. Do you guys remember Spam? Do you even know what it is? It's like a canned meat, and my sister bought it for me. I don't know, she just thought she was being funny to let me know they still make it because we ate it sometimes growing up. Well, I put my ham and my Spam out there, and I put a gigantic bowl of it. I thought, oh, I know he cannot resist this. And would you believe the next day I went out there, the bowl was completely outside of the cage. It had been licked clean, and the door was up. So there are only two things. It's either the rats have eaten the food and they're not heavy enough to make the door go down, or the possums are getting smarter and they're standing at the end of the cage and reaching way in there to pull the food out. Or one's holding the door while the other one grabs the food. I don't know, but it's all out war over here at my place. So stay tuned because I still can't believe that I couldn't catch him when he was clearly here. And ham and Spam. Seriously, who could refuse ham and Spam? So we're going to talk more about that. Stay tuned. Now tonight I'm giving away another case of Beanitos. Check it out. Here they are. Everybody knows how good they are. This is the black bean plain flavor. And oh my gosh, some homemade salsa or some guacamole, and you have got a party for one. You have to remember, if you invite other people, they're going to eat them. So you have to decide, am I sharing tonight or is it a party for one? So stick around because I'm going to be giving these away in just a little bit. Okay. Now, you'll remember 2 weeks ago, I did a show where I gave you 20 tips for creating a great New Year for yourself. A lot of people made New Year's resolutions, but keeping them, that's the hard part. So it seems that most people do resolutions about losing weight and about eating better. So I got 3 tips from Dr. Oz. You guys know him, right? Maybe I'll have to get Dr. Oz on the show. But I got 3 tips from Dr. Oz that I think are great, and hopefully they will help you. Dr. Oz says, in reference to eating, create a meal plan because we make wrong choices when we decide what to eat after we're hungry. So, what he suggests is to decide on what you're going to have for breakfast and for lunch in advance. And he says, eat the same thing for a few days. Make it easy on yourself. You may say, I'm going to have oatmeal for breakfast every day, and I'm going to have fish and a salad for lunch. And then when you get tired of that, come up with something else. But that way you don't have to think about it so much. And the most important thing is not to wait until you're starving because you're going to eat whatever you can get your hands on. The next thing, he says that not getting enough sleep is really detrimental to the body. And if you don't get your right rest, you're more subject to heart disease and diabetes and other illnesses. So he says what you should do is to try to go to bed 30 minutes earlier every day. It will help your body so much. And I love this, set your alarm clock to go to bed. Isn't that amazing? We always set them to wake up. But in this case, if you set it to go to bed, it will help you realize, okay, this is it. I'm winding it down because it's all about me being healthy in 2012. Okay, the third thing is to get a buddy. We all know when you have a buddy, they help motivate you on a day where you're thinking, I'm not working out. Your buddy will say, hey, come on, we got to do it. And also, it can be really fun when you're doing crunches or you're exercising together and you're thinking, I am about to pass out over here. I'm about to die. And you look over there and your buddy's face is red or purple, and you can start laughing and you can find some humor in it and you're challenged to keep going. And most importantly, you are accountable to somebody. So those are 3 great tips. I will keep checking in with you to see how the resolutions are going. But those are 3 great tips from the one and only Dr. Oz. Okay, next. I don't want to hold up Dr. Baldwin too much because this topic is so important. And all of us know, we're all on the social media sites, and we just see so much dialogue on a daily basis from so many of our peers who are just hurting and suffering in so many ways and really not understanding grief and not knowing what to do about it. And I just started thinking, what is grief? And I was on widowedvillage.org. You guys may know that this is a branch of Soaring Spirits Loss Foundation. And somebody had written something, what grief looks like. And I didn't copy all of it, but just a few things they said. It really is some food for thought. What grief looks like. A drowning child flailing wildly for a lifesaver he cannot reach. A baby bird fallen from its nest and abandoned by its own mother. Grief is a rabid dog howling inconsolably at the moon. A violent car crash and an explosion of flames. A nightmare on endless replay with no one to wake me. Isn't that just so amazing? All of that just depicts a lot of pain, and grief causes pain. Now, before I get Dr. Baldwin on the phone, though, I'd like to remind everybody about Camp Widow East. A lot of us have gone to Camp Widow West, which is in San Diego every year in August. This is the first year for Camp Widow East, and it's going to take place in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, April 20th, 21st, and 22nd. And if you're able to go, you will stay at the Myrtle Beach Grand Dunes Resort and Spa. And here's the great part. Registration is $375, but if you register and you say, I heard about this on Rob and Craig Live, you're going to save 50 bucks. Isn't that the bomb? $325 for viewers of Rob and Craig Live. So in order to get more information, go to campwidow.org. The rooms are $169 per night. You're basically going to stay 2 nights, but you can get a roommate and you split the cost. And I did that when I went to Camp Widow West, and I met a gal that we're just like best friends. I loved her, and it was a lot of fun. So I hope you're able to go check that out. And if you want to read more about what grief looks like, go to widowedvillage.org. Okay, so now, oh my gosh, look at the chat room. Donita and Carol Scubelli. Honey, I'm so glad you're here. And we always love having Ellen and Julia and Nyla and Shannon. Terry has joined us regularly. I love that. And Diane with Widow's Ring and Wild Rose Ranch. Honey, I'm telling you, all of you guys are making my day. This is so fabulous and so beautiful. Okay, let's get Dr. Baldwin on the phone. Hello, Dr. Baldwin, are you there? Hello? Hi, you're on Robin Craig Live. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Robin. How are you?
I am doing absolutely great, just trying to stay warm in our 50-degree weather. Were you cold today?
You know, I had to go out and feed my horses this morning, as I do every morning, and it was the wind that was a bit chilly. Other than that, I love this weather.
Yes, I mean, at least we're not sweating, and we will be sweating before long. But so
Sure.
many people have been laughing at me, going, Robin, it's in the 50s. How can you be cold? But it just seems like 50s in our area is colder than it is in other areas. I don't know. I'm not a
If
weather
there's
girl.
moisture in the air, I think you're right.
Yeah, it's just crazy. So at least I'm not the only one that was cold today. So were you able to hear what I was reading about what grief looks like?
Yes, those were some pretty poignant images, were they not?
Oh my goodness. And this was only a portion of them. You know, I wanted to spend more time chatting with you, but it just touched me so where you could tell that the writer was thinking of the worst things that would cause you pain and you wouldn't be able to do anything about it and sure capitalized on it. It was amazing.
Yeah,
So,
those were very uh, emotional images.
yes, well, in your words, what is grief? How do you describe what it is?
Well, there are two things that every human being on the face of the planet will experience: being born and dying. And grief is a process. It's definitely not an event, something that just happens. It's something that people move through. And, you know, those images that you described, um, I guess that's the best way to try to verbalize what grief feels like. Because for most people, grief is a stranger. They've never experienced anything like that before.
Yes. Yes. And it seems like we can't understand it until we're in it. And then we feel so terrible, we don't even know what to do to try to find out about it. I think by now there's a fair amount of information in regards to the stages of grief. Can you tell everybody what those stages are?
Sure, and there is some I guess, discussion amongst professionals about use of the word stages because I think that using words like stage implies that there's a pre-described path,
Okay.
and there's really not. So, but having said that, I think a lot of people think in terms of we'll call them phases, perhaps.
Okay.
So when you talk about phases, probably the first phase that people go through has to be like survival, disbelief. Um, those are some of the frequent emotions that people or just kind of maybe cognitive sensations that people have initially upon finding out about the death of a loved one, if it wasn't an expected death. But even when it's an anticipated death, you know, you can't always anticipate all the emotions that are going to come with that.
Yes.
But what I would say, and I'm sitting here, I got to tell you something. I'm looking at my notes and I'm thinking, I know I wrote the exact question down that you're asking, and now, that's why it's on a different piece of paper. Look at that. All right, so the phases that people sometimes talk about: shock, disorganization, and then reorganization. Shock, like I was saying, disbelief and numbing, really having no idea what it's like to not have the person be there until they're gone, followed by moving into disorganization, not knowing what your life is going to be like, or what kind of
Yes.
problems you're going to have to solve on your own, or what your financial situation might be like now,
Yes.
and then hopefully moving into getting it together, kind of reorganizing, moving through that process of grief to get to the other side, so to speak.
And when you start to grieve, that immediate impact, oh my gosh, someone I love is gone, what happens to you physically? I remember when my husband died, I felt like my head was gigantic to where I would look at a doorway thinking, can I get through it? And then I would have to stop and say, of course I can get through it. But my head felt gigantic. So what is happening in the body that causes those kinds of feelings?
Keep in mind that emotions are energy. Okay, so emotions are information that our energetic bodies create to give us information. So some of the conditions or emotions that are really common in the grieving process are anguish and fear, denial, despair, of course, sadness, lots of anger, lots of guilt, and anxiety. And I think that one of the things that you're describing is almost a feeling of like a perceptual distortion, which is very common in the anxiety and fear response when your mind is kind of clicking into a different part. You're not processing things in the same way that you normally do in the frontal part of your neocortex. You kind of slip back to the primitive part of your brain, and as a result, there are all kinds of things that happen. You might have stomach distress, difficulty sleeping,
Yes.
trouble remembering or concentrating or processing information in which the way that you ordinarily would. Sometimes people's emotions are so intense that they don't even remember certain aspects of what has happened after a person passes away.
Yes.
So there's all kinds of, I mean, you're just not in a normal physiological state especially when you're just in an acute phase of grieving.
Yes, and my husband, who died suddenly and unexpectedly, he was 43 years old, and hours before his death, he's flexing his big biceps. And I'm like, boy, you're sure working out. You look great. And then boom, he just fell out. And I was not able to eat a morsel. And I've been on a diet since I was 7 years old. So for me to hear people say, Robin, you have to eat, it was so foreign. And I kept thinking, I can't believe that I'm not able to eat. But they would bring me like a little bowl of fruit with like 5 little pieces of fruit, and I would look at it and just gag. What's that about with the eating?
Well, I mean, the there's a clear part of the brain that controls appetite, and I don't know the exact neurochemistry of what you were going through at that point, but clearly the part of your brain that controls appetite was different from how it normally functions. So your appetite center was turned off. And it is a unique experience when you've never lost your appetite like that before, and
I
then all of a
know.
sudden it's like forcing yourself to eat is
I
just
know. I
it's
know.
really is a physical experience.
And when you're having those things, it makes you acutely aware that you are so off because
Right.
you don't understand it and you've never felt that way, but you don't have control over it. I mean, I lost 20 pounds, and I'm the kind of girl that has to get a haircut, arch her eyebrows, and go shave her fingernails down to lose a pound. So when I lost 20 pounds, I'm like, what's going on here? And sometimes I wondered if it was because I was so used to eating meals with my husband, was I feeling guilty because he wasn't able to eat and I was? Does that make sense?
Oh, sure, absolutely. That's a possibility. Um, I think that you have to just keep in mind. I mean, this is just an obvious statement, but I think for whatever reason, the way that we often look at ourselves is to kind of split the mind from the body, and they're completely connected. So whatever is going on in terms of your experience of grief is affecting your brain. And in this case, the kind of weight loss and the kind of appetite loss that you described was clearly your brain chemistry was different. And yeah, it's entirely possible that you were had some kind of feelings going on about your husband not being allowed to eat because he's not here anymore. He's passed away. He's dead.
Yes, and I'm monitoring the chat room. The chat room is just all lit up. And Carol says that she felt like she was having an outer body experience, that she really wasn't in her body. I felt that same way. Is that customary?
Yes, as I said, those kind of perceptual distortions. I mean, think about it. This is something you had never experienced before. You have no frame of reference. Your body, your brain has no frame of reference for having a person who you love in your life, and then suddenly they're gone. They're not here anymore. So you don't have any way to kind of line that up with anything else unless you've lost another person. And that is true for some people, but for most of us, we get into our 40s, 50s, and sometimes even 60s without having experienced the loss of a very significant relationship. So those kind of perceptual distortions where your brain is just kind of just going through something that it's never been through before can lead to all kinds of unique experiences, including the experience of the person who's died, like hearing them walking down the hall, smelling perfume,
Yes.
swearing that you feel them touch your shoulder,
Yes.
or that they're sitting next to you or lying next to you in bed. Those are all really common experiences.
And is that, I mean, that's kind of a different topic because some people consider those things to be more spiritual. But do you think that people really are touching you, or they really are in your presence? Or do you feel that it's your mind wanting it so desperately that you're thinking that?
Well, I think that if I were answering that question as like from a scientific background, I would say the latter.
Yes.
That it's just you have conditioned responses. In other words, like I'm just thinking about my dog. You know, my dog, he comes walking down the hallway. I hear his collar kind of jingling. So I thought to myself before that when my dog passes away, I will very likely hear that jingling sound because there are many times throughout the day when I know he's going to come find me. But I think if I were to answer that question personally, I do have some beliefs that the energy, spirit, if you will, of a loved one who's passed on, I personally believe that they can hang around and that they actually can communicate with people in dreams. But you know, maybe I shouldn't say that because people might think, you know, she's a psychologist. But you know, hey, I believe that, and I talk to people about that, and I put it out there that this is what I believe, and I'm not forcing my beliefs on others. I'm always kind of curious what other people think.
I know I wanted to have one of those wonderful experiences where I felt like my husband was sitting on the end of the bed or something. I wanted one of those and I didn't have it. So I thought, well, you know, I don't know why some people have it and some people don't. I thought, well, boy, when my husband left, he just like took off. That was it for me, you know. You know, she's fine. I'll see her later. But I
Yeah.
wanted to
Does that
have that.
upset you?
I'm sorry?
Does that upset you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I wanted to have that feeling like, oh, he's still just right here, but it just didn't happen. Now I'm looking at the chat room and I see Joy. Joy, honey, I'm so glad you were able to get in the chat room. But she says that she gains weight instead of losing weight when she loses a loved one. So what makes somebody gain weight and somebody else lose weight like I did?
You know, losing death is stressful, right? Having somebody die in your
Yes.
life is a very stressful experience, and
Yes.
so people respond to stress differently. And some people do eat for comfort; it makes them feel better. Eating certainly releases neurotransmitters in the brain that can resemble an altered state of consciousness, almost like a high. And so, for some people, that's what they turn to. I mean, I would imagine that if somebody gains weight, it is associated with a change in eating behavior. I've never heard of somebody gaining weight where it's not also associated with a change in how they eat, like they just naturally gain weight and they're eating exactly the same. I suppose that's a possibility if your metabolism changes or if your exercise habits change, perhaps. If there's like a ripple effect of other
Right.
behaviors in your life.
Right. I know I read an article once that said you either can't eat anything when you're grieving or you can't stop eating like Godiva chocolates, for example.
Right.
So,
Right.
well, what can people expect of themselves? It seems like when you're grieving, you're hard on yourself because you feel that you should be able to perform and you really can't. But for people who are watching tonight and they're grieving, what should we really expect of ourselves?
Well, I think the main thing to expect is just a jumble of emotions, and and emotions that sometimes are experienced simultaneously or in such rapid succession that you could even feel like you're losing your mind. So
Yes.
one day you may be holed up in your room and unable to leave your house or your bedroom, and then the next day you may go out and spend 6 hours running errands. Um, I think that that's the biggest expectation is, and I know it sounds kind of, it would be nice to say, okay, you expect A and then B and then C and then D, but everybody is different. And keep in mind too that the relationships that people have with the deceased are different. Sometimes that relationship wasn't that great,
Yes.
and so it's not always like you're deeply in love and then the person dies and you're devastated. Sometimes, you know, you're not so deeply in love and they die and you can be devastated or not. So it just really, I think the main thing is just to know that you're not going crazy when you just go back and forth from one emotion to another, or you have weird emotions that you wouldn't expect, like being jealous of other people because
Mm,
their husbands haven't died.
yes. Yes, and so I gather at the end of the day, we don't know what's going to happen to us, but most of the things that happen are considered a normal part of grieving. It's just that it is so foreign to us that we think we're going crazy because we've never had that kind of a sensation before.
I think that that's accurate. Now, having said that, I will say that there are some, I guess, things you could look for that might indicate at some point it's not following, even though the path is can be so unique and so different that it's I don't want to use the word normal, but it's not going in a healthy direction. Um, I think people can become stuck, and I think people can become
Yes.
mainly stuck in emotions like anger and guilt. Those are
Yes.
probably the two most easy to get stuck in emotions, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Why, guilt is the word that everybody uses all the time. Why is it that losing someone brings so much guilt?
Well, guilt is guilt is a really useful emotion. And just kind of going back to what I said about
Hmm.
providing information. So guilt is the emotion that we experience that tells us we did something wrong. So when somebody dies, I think it's just kind of a natural thing to think about all the things that you did wrong in relation to that person's life or the process of their death.
Yes.
Um, and frankly, guilt affects the broadest number of people. I mean, that is the feeling. Guilt and anger are the two feelings that people report experiencing the most. And people are really good at generating reasons to make themselves feel guilty. I mean, you can pretty much come up with like a guilt du jour if you wanted to, and
Hmm.
each one seems equally valid, and you can just really kind of focus and even obsess about that
Yes.
if you
Yes.
don't get help kind of moving through that. But I just think that mainly it's people's way of trying to figure out, okay, this person died, they shouldn't have died, so what did I do wrong that kind of
Yes.
contributed or somehow impacted that situation?
Yes,
Um,
I'm watching Carol in the chat room saying that she felt a bit guilty when she reviewed her marriage after her husband died and thought about things that she could have been kinder about and so forth. That seems to be pretty common, doesn't it?
oh yeah,
Yeah, it seems like it's things that you said that you wish you hadn't. It's things that you didn't say that you wish you had. And a lot of people seem to feel guilty that maybe they didn't do enough or that they didn't see things that maybe they could have either prolonged their spouse's death or their loved one's death, whoever it is, or maybe they should have gotten better medical treatment. I mean, there's so much associated with us feeling a responsibility that we should have been able to help them more.
yes. And really at the heart of it, and I think that this is something that people really grapple with. I mean, when you feel guilty, really what you're saying to yourself is that you should be in charge of what happens in the world. That you know that somehow
Yes,
you are in control,
yes, yes,
and we're not.
yes. We are so out of control, but somehow we always feel that we've got some kind of special power and that we can fix things or prevent things. And in reality, we can't. And I think most everybody does the best they can, but there's something about when somebody dies, you stop thinking about, oh, I did this, this, and this for that person. You start to think about what you didn't do. And the
Right,
guilt just can really take you over.
right, right. Because you don't have the opportunity to be with them anymore,
Yes. And
and
it's so
so
final.
it's just a very natural, I guess, pathway to take. That gee,
Yes.
I don't have the opportunity to be with this person anymore. Look at all the stuff I didn't do, or look at
Yes.
the ways in which I didn't get around to treating them, or how um, I promises that I made that I never fulfilled, or the time that I didn't spend with them.
Yes.
Because
Or
you can't make that up. So that's what you focus on.
yes. Not being there when they passed. So many things. Well, are there any things that people can do to move beyond the guilt?
Sure. I mean, it kind of in line with our conversation. At some point, you start balancing out. Okay, here's one thing that I'm feeling guilty about, and here is something that I did do. So I mean, at some point there has to be an argument that goes on in your head. Maybe initially right after the person dies, and you're just overwhelmed with all these mumbled, jumbled, crazy feelings.
Yes.
At some point, as you start to kind of process this and work through it, and get to the other side, part of that is talking to other people and writing. If you're a journaler, I was never very good at that because it felt like it was a big old homework assignment that I was not talking about feeling guilty. It's like, oh, I didn't journal today. I feel bad. So I finally just gave that up. But anyway, I think that journaling is extremely helpful. People write. There are all kinds of ways that you can process these feelings. And part of that is kind of like with Oprah, when she talks about the gratitude list and not
Yes.
just focusing on the things that are messed up in your life, but also the things you're grateful for. It's
Yes.
the same type of deal. It's like, oh, gee, I didn't, call my mom enough. Like, but I did do blah, 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 blah. So that there's a reasonable dialogue in your head that's not completely one-sided.
Yes. Okay. All right. That's good. What do you say to people who have lost multiple loved ones together? Ellen was saying she lost her mom, she lost her husband, and that she was just so exhausted because it seems like the grief compounds.
Yeah. I think it probably does. I mean, hold on, let me take a drink of water.
Yeah. And so, what do you do when people keep dying and you have to keep functioning and you're having to plan yet one more funeral or memorial service? How do people cope with all of this?
Well, I tell you, it's not easy. I think the best thing that people can do is to try to get help, to see if there's somebody out there who can help, and basically provide a shoulder that they can kind of prop themselves up on as they're moving through one after the other. I mean, hopefully, well, this does happen to people. You talk to them all the time, and they'll say things like, 2008 was a really crappy year for me. I lost my mom. I lost my sister to cancer, and then my
Yes.
husband's dad died,
Yes.
and then to top it all off, we had to put our dog to sleep.
Yes.
And sometimes it's that last thing that it's like a pet that
Yes.
just sends them over the edge.
Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, I saw one of the gals in one of the social media sites is really having a difficult time because her pet is really sick and she's having a hard time thinking, will he just die on his own, or am I hanging on to him for the wrong reasons? Do I need to put him down? But it's almost like we just can't bear one more death.
Yeah, and that is very difficult.
Yeah.
And there's just no easy way to grapple with that other than trying to do the best you can and talking to other people who have been through it. I think in grieving, when you talk about support groups or things of that nature, I think the most important criterion is to have the people who are in that group have something in common with you.
Yes.
Whether it be the type of death or the person in your life, like loss of a child, going to a support group where people have lost children only. And it's not a necessary type deal, but I think, if you were going to look for an ideal world, that would be something that would be important. But social support, and if somebody's experienced multiple deaths, it just, however you can find to kind of replenish yourself, because of course you don't know, well, maybe you do if somebody's sick, but you don't always know that the next death is coming.
Yes. Yes.
But
And
I would just,
what I'm
taking care of
hearing,
yourself at that point is even more important. I'm sorry?
what I'm hearing is that we need support. And why is it that when we need so much support that so many people let us down?
Well, I think what is very common is for the person who's grieving, it takes a lot longer than what most people who have not grieved or not, have not been through that would imagine. So many times within one's community, there's a pressure to get back to normal or be like you used to be, be fun and witty and fun to go out with like you used to be. And people don't, most people have better social skills than to walk up and say, hey, snap out of it, quit acting like this. So I don't say that, but there's the subtle kind of indications.
Yes, well, and sometimes people say harsh things like you just need to move forward. Or I talked to a widow once, and it was the 3rd anniversary of her husband's death. And her daughter, she kept her daughter home from school. She spoke to the teachers, and everybody knew what was going on. And when the widow shared it with her mother, who was the grandmother of the little girl, the grandmother said, how long are y'all going to milk this? Like 3 years, you shouldn't have to skip school to grieve over the loss of your dad. I mean, what do you say to people like that?
What would I say to the grandmother, or what would I say
to the grandmother, to people like her who say things like that to those who are grieving?
Well, if I were being tactful, what I would say is something like, I think what this is really about is your desire to get back to normal. And I think that it's uncomfortable for you that your daughter and your granddaughter are still grieving, because I would assume that you care about them and you know that grieving is a difficult, and I don't know that they were grieving. Maybe that was just their ritual. Rituals can be really important, so I don't know exactly the staying home. But I would say to her is, this is more about you not being able to cope with the discomfort or the change in the life of your daughter and your granddaughter, and that you just want things to go back to normal so that you can feel okay.
Yes. Yes. That's...
If I was not being tactful, I would say, what the hell are you thinking? Like,
you suck.
What's going on here? And your daughter's probably already been in therapy because of what you're saying now. But
I know, that is so beautiful what you said, and you're right. we get so angry because we're hurting and we want people to understand and to help us with it that we quite often say the wrong thing. But what you just shared is a beautiful thing to say when people tell us you need to move on, you're dragging this thing out, what's your problem? It's beautiful to say your reaction is about you when it's really about me. That's fabulous. Thank you for that. I read something online that says effective mourning is not done alone. Unfortunately, friends and family members may be finished with your grief long before you are finished, and you still need to talk about it. And unexpressed feelings can become distorted. It is important that you find an understanding, non judgmental listener with whom you can openly acknowledge your feelings and experiences, express and work through your pain, and come to terms with your loss. If friends and family are not as available as you need them to be, or if your need exceeds their capacity to help, consider attending a support group or seeking help from a bereavement counselor. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely, I do. Think of it this way. Early on in my marriage, I realized that my husband was not going to be super good at just kind of sitting and listening to me vent and kind of kvetch about things.
Yes.
And so rather than getting really frustrated and kind of angry with him that he couldn't just sit there and go, oh gosh, that really stinks and I'm sorry that happened to you, I went out and found, my girlfriends who are very good at that. And so it's the same in any relationship. You can't expect a person to be able to meet all of your needs. And so if your friends and family get to the point where they can't meet those needs, then it is important not to throw them out or kind of devalue that relationship because they're not there for you, so to speak, but to go out and find somebody who has the capacity and the training, perhaps, if that's what the case may be, or who has been there, and it's a better fit.
Yes, that's so beautiful. Now, one thing that I hear people talking about a lot is the different types of grief and how you grieve differently for different people. What is the difference between grieving for a spouse versus grieving for a parent?
Grieving for a spouse versus a parent.
Yes.
Well, I think grief is affected. Well, I think actually the needs or what a grieving person is going through, to some extent, there's some universality to that. Um, I think the nature of the relationship and just, if you think about it from a natural standpoint, your parents are supposed to die before you or your spouse or your children. So people do have this kind of, as we try to make sense of our world and have order and control in our world, we do like to think that there is kind of a natural progression of the old people die and then you get old and then you die, and so it kind of works that way. So I think to a certain extent, even though I think people consider it more of kind of in a natural realm for parents to pass away
Mm-hmm.
before a spouse. It just depends on the relationship too. I mean, for some people, they're very close to their parents, and losing a parent is super difficult.
So,
And maybe not so much with a spouse.
so does that mean that losing a child is worse because you never expect to die before your children?
I think for most people, if you were to take 10 people and line them up and say which is worse, losing your spouse or losing your child, I bet you 9.5 of them would say losing a child. Now that is not scientific information. That is just, I just think
Yes.
I think that is true. I think that that what the death of a spouse represents. Um, some people feel like they've lost their best friend, or it makes them feel old, makes them
Uh-huh.
feel closer to death, which is an uncomfortable, very uncomfortable feeling because you don't really think about. I mean, when your parents die, I know my dad told me that when his parents died, he felt like he was like the next up to bat. You know, he went from the batter's box to standing at the plate. He was up next. When your spouse dies, I think for a lot of people that they do have to kind of face their own mortality. Now, when their child dies, I mean, you lose a part of yourself. That a lot of people feel that way. They feel like they have lost a part of their connection to the future. A big source of love. Our children are usually a big source of where we get our love and affection. Expectations, you know,
Yes.
future, grandchildren.
Yes.
And I will tell you this, and I get people that come in for couples therapy, and, you know, kind of something that people come in and that they're dealing with is like infidelity. And for infidelity, it's just kind of like, well, can we recover? Can this marriage get any better? But really, the hardest thing for a marriage to endure is the death of a child.
Yes,
that is actually the thing that tears marriages apart more than anything. It is really super hard.
Well, it's interesting. I'm looking at poor widow me, and she says that she knew a woman in her 70s who lost her husband of 40 years, her 45-year-old married son who had a wife and kids, and an 18-month-old. And she asked which one was worse, and the 70-year-old said that the 18-month-old was the worst. So maybe it's what we're talking about, the natural progression of life, that you just don't ever expect to outlive a child. And when you do, boy, I mean, death is hard any way you slice it, but to lose a child is so difficult. How do you know when what you're experiencing is normal and it will get better versus when do you need professional help?
Well, I think, you know, everyone's path is unique. I think in general, there's a general consensus that emotional healing can, you know, that you can expect that kind of starts and gets going by the end of the 6th month and by the beginning of the 2nd year. So by the end of the 6th month and beginning of the 2nd year, some emotional healing has taken place. Obviously, and once you've lost somebody, you're a changed individual. You have a new normal. You're not going to go back to being the same person that you were.
Yes.
I would say, though, that with the anger and the guilt in particular, or anxiety, or any kind of physiological state where it causes a lot of discomfort or is very draining. You know, the big thing about anger is it's completely normal to feel lots of anger at lots of different people, and to be able to vent that and to kind of keep yourself grounded. When anger is grounded, when it's focused and released, then it's going to begin to slow and lose energy, and you can start to heal. But if anger is draining you over time, if it feels like the anger is using you instead of you using the anger, so to speak, if it's anger can be energizing. It can give you temporary energy, or it can really deplete you. And sometimes people get angry, and out of that they take action, and they feel like they've got some control back in their life because they're, you know, proposing legislation, or they're setting up a memorial fund, or, you know, they're taking some kind of action step. But of course, those are huge. It doesn't even have to be a huge action step. It can be a small one. But I would say that if that time frame goes by and you just feel yourself not feeling like you're moving through that circle of loss and mourning and getting through the other side, then it might be time to seek assistance.
Yes, because you know, we all have to struggle just to get out of bed and perform and do what we need to do, and we can feel how tired we are and how we feel so off. But you can also feel over time that you're better, and that doesn't mean you don't burst into tears in the middle of the mall or wherever. It just means that you can feel you're getting better. But I think it is important for people to understand that there's a lot of good professional help out there, and that it's great for everybody to understand when they need help. So I'm putting up your website right now, lauriebaldwin.com, is your website. And if there's anybody that needs any help, obviously you can look her up, and I'm sure she'll be able to help you or guide you, because we're speaking to Dr. Laurie Baldwin on the phone right now. You want to take a break and give away some Beanitos, Dr. Laurie?
Sure.
This will be really fun. Okay, because we're going to play a little game this time. Everybody knows that Beanitos are great. And first of all, I want to acknowledge Melanie and Cheryl Lynn and Joy. I love having all of you new guys, and I love having all the oldie but goodies. You guys are just chatting up a storm, and it's great to see. Now, if you're new to the show, I love to give away Beanitos. I love to eat them as well. I'm giving away a case of them. The little individual packages, you get 24 of them. So this night, you have to be in the chat room to win. So everybody in the chat room has to pick a number between 1 and 40. And I'm going to hold up a number. I can't cheat. I've got a number on the back of this, and the closest person to this number wins. So everybody give us your numbers. This is so fun, isn't it? We're talking about grief, but by golly, we're having fun on Rob and Craig Live. Okay,
What did you say what did you say the range was?
1 to 40.
Okay.
Has everybody given a number? Is everybody, I'm gonna flip my number around. Is everybody, okay, Joy gave her number. Does everybody have a number in the chat room? Okay, all right, here we go. It's number 24. It looks like Joy has won. Joy, you're getting a case of Beanitos. Your first time to get into the chat room, and you won a case of these fabulous chips. You're going to love them. And I'm excited because I know that you're in my area. You can invite me over and we'll have a Beanitos party. Isn't that great? I'm so excited. Okay, so we just wanted to have a little small bit of fun there, Dr. Baldwin.
Well, Robin, you have to tell me, what is a bonito?
This is a chip that is made from beans rather than corn. They are low glycemic. They have protein. They have omegas, and they have high fiber, and they are so good. It's almost like a marriage between a potato chip and a tortilla chip to me, and they're so good. My favorite is the chipotle barbecue flavor, but the plain ones are so good with salsa or guacamole, and you can find them at places like Whole Foods and Central Market. You can buy them at beanitos.com, beanitos.com, and they're in a lot of the grocery stores, so ask for them because they are so good. And I call them guilt-free chips. You can munch on them without thinking that you're doing something bad for your body. So I'm thrilled, Joy, that you won. So,
well, thank you for telling me about those. I will definitely go out and purchase upon something.
I'm telling you, the people that watch the show regularly are forever taking pictures and sending me notes on Facebook saying, I just found Beanitos at the local health food store. I mean, you have to kind of go on a search for them, but they're all over the nation. And if you can't find them, you can get them at beanitos.com. But they are just so good. I mean, the moment I ate them, I was like hooked. So I'm delighted. I've given away so many. Almost everybody that watches the show has won some at some point or another, but they're so good. So before we close out with understanding grief, are there any last words or anything that you think would benefit the viewers? Because everybody who's watching has lost somebody they care about.
Well, I think the most important thing is just to give yourself time and to know that it's going to be just a barrage of various emotions, and to not judge yourself, because I think that, like I said earlier when I was talking about the example of one day not leaving your house and the next day maybe even going and having lunch with a friend or going to a party and then feeling really bad about that, like you're supposed to stay in your house for a certain amount of time. There's no one proper way to grieve or to mourn loss. And I think it's really important for people to find a meaningful way, and whether that means planting trees in the person's honor, or
Yes.
spending time with animals. Those are the kind of things that pop into my head because those are
Yes.
what are meaningful to me.
And I
Um,
love that. I love that.
so I just think that knowing that it's going to be, having the expectation, setting the expectation that it's going to be a very emotional journey, knowing that or having faith and believing that you can get through it, and that when you do get through it, you may say to yourself, even though I'm not going to be the same, it's going to be okay. And then finding ways that you can take action and feel to have some control in your life. Um, and for me, that would be pursuing things in nature that are meaningful to me, and almost taking the opportunity to try to learn more about myself. I think when you have somebody significant in your life and they're not there anymore, that is a very unique opportunity to learn a lot of things about yourself that you wouldn't otherwise have had the
Yes.
opportunity to learn.
Yes, that is so beautiful. My goodness. And you say to make meaning out of things. People always want to say things happen for a reason, and that's offensive to us. But you say make meaning out of things.
Well, I just think, you know, one way of coping with life in general is to try to figure out what it means, or to find some kind of meaning. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you find the answer, or you hit upon why something happened.
Yes.
Um, but sometimes, well, not sometimes, a lot of times the story that you tell yourself about something makes a big difference about how you feel about it.
Yes.
And sometimes it's just a matter of accepting that death doesn't have a selection process. Death doesn't. There's no fairness to it at all. It's a state that every human being goes through at some point in time.
Yes. And then we just have to hang in there and do the best we can. Bottom line. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Baldwin, for being with us. You're wonderful. For you viewers, I met Dr. Laurie, as I call her, working on Texas Justice, one of the court TV shows at Fox here in Houston. And she's been on a number of different TV shows, and I really appreciate her spending her time helping everybody tonight to understand grief a little bit better. I know I learned some things, so I appreciate you so much, and I hope that you'll come back.
Well, I had this is a really great opportunity for me. I've never done this kind of thing before, and I, even though I didn't have a chance to interact with people in the normal way, I feel like I did in some kind of kinetic, spiritual, internet technology way. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, Robin. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure, totally, and we're going to do it again. Thank you so much, and have a great evening.
All right, you too.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Isn't she just the greatest? I'll tell you, she's so full of information, and her willingness to want to help others is just so touching. I mean, not like she doesn't have something else to do, right? But she did shed a lot of light, and we just know that this whole grief thing is really, really a difficult place to be, and there's nothing to do but just hang in there and ride the wave. But we understand the importance of finding people that we can talk to who are non-judgmental. And that's why, once again, all of you guys have been so great. Most of us have met either at Camp Widow or through the social media sites, and we can all talk and share without pointing the finger at one another, and it's priceless. So I appreciate you guys so much. I'm delighted that you're watching the show. I love all of the new people. It's so exciting, and I love, Joy, that you won a case of Benitos. I'm going to be giving away more, so please join me every Tuesday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, right here, same time, same place. And bring a friend with you. There are a lot of people out there that would really appreciate some information, and you can watch it, as you know, in your pajamas or in your sweatsuit, in your bed with your laptop. I think I'm the only one that does an extreme makeover for the show, right? So I'm going to stick around in the chat room for a few minutes and talk, so don't go away. Let's keep the dialogue going. And once again, thank you.